The psychology of discipline. Let's talk about discipline. The word alone probably conjures a very specific image. Someone waking up at 5 a.m. Cold shower. No implants. Pristine meal prep lined up in the fridge. A workout completed before most people have even located their phone. And somewhere, quietly in the background, the rest of us are lying in bed at 7:45 wondering if we can get away with calling this a slow morning rather than a catastrophic failure of character. Here's the thing, though. The story we've been told about discipline, that it's a personality trait belonging to a select group of unusually stoic, superhuman individuals who simply want it more than the rest of us, is not what the science says. The science says something far more interesting and far more useful. What discipline actually is. Decade after decade, psychologists have returned to the same question. What is the most important factor in predicting whether a person will lead a successful, healthy, fulfilling life? Not charisma, not luck, not even intelligence. When psychologists look at the traits most strongly linked to positive life outcomes, two come up again and again: intelligence and self-control. Nothing else comes close. Self-control. The ability to regulate your behavior in service of your longer-term goals. To do the thing you said you'd do, when you said you'd do it, even when you'd rather not. But here's what the research has discovered about how that actually works. And it is almost completely opposite to the cultural mythology surrounding discipline. The willpower problem. In 1998, psychologist Roy Baumeister conducted an experiment that became one of the most cited in all of psychology. He sat participants in a room that smelled magnificently, cruelly, of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. In front of them sat two things: a plate of those cookies and a bowl of radishes. One group was told to eat the cookies. The other was told to eat only the radishes and resist the cookies entirely. Then both groups were given a challenging geometric puzzle to work on. The people who had eaten the radishes and resisted the cookies gave up on the puzzle after about 8 minutes. The lucky cookie eaters persevered for nearly 19 minutes. The act of resisting the cookies, of exercising self-control in one area, had measurably depleted the participants' capacity for self-control in a completely unrelated task immediately afterward. Baumeister called this ego depletion, the idea that willpower functions like a muscle, powerful in the short term, but exhaustible. Use it in one area, and there is less of it available for the next challenge. Since that work was published, numerous studies build a case for willpower depletion, demonstrating that exerting self-control in one area uses up the energy available for further self-regulation in other areas of life. Now, fair warning, subsequent research has complicated parts of this picture. Large-scale replication attempts have produced mixed results, and the debate about exactly how willpower depletion works continues actively in the literature. But here is what is held up: the practical implication that trying to white-knuckle your way through life on pure willpower alone, relying on brute force discipline across every domain simultaneously, is not a sustainable strategy. Not because you are weak, because you are human, and humans have a finite cognitive budget that gets spent. The people who appear most disciplined, the research suggests, are not the ones burning through that budget most dramatically. They're the ones who have learned not to need it. The secret that disciplined people have. Here is the finding that changes everything. When you look at people who exhibit high levels of self-control, the common pattern across them is not that they have higher discipline than the average person. It is that they spend less time in tempting situations. Read that again. The most disciplined people aren't the ones who resist temptation most heroically. They're the ones who encounter it least often, because they have arranged their environments, their routines, and their daily structures to make the right choice the easy choice, and the wrong choice genuinely inconvenient. Disciplined people are better at structuring their lives in a way that does not require heroic willpower and self-control. Self-control is a short-term strategy, not a long-term one. In the long run, whoever designs their environment in their favor wins. Research confirms this with almost comical precision. The likelihood of flossing increases dramatically if the floss is next to the toothbrush, and drops drastically if it's in a drawer. Office workers with visible snack machines eat significantly more than those whose machines are on another floor. The amount of food consumed is more influenced by plate size than by actual hunger. In each case, Nothing about the person changed. The context changed, and the behavior followed. This is what researchers call choice architecture, and it is one of the most robust findings in all of behavioral science. Your environment is not a neutral backdrop to your choices. It is actively shaping them constantly, whether you are paying attention or not. The question is simply, are you designing that environment on purpose or letting it run on default? Why self-discipline beats IQ? In 2005, psychologists Angela Duckworth and Martin Seligman published a study that has been cited over 1,000 times since. They tracked 148th grade students across a school year, measuring self-discipline through multiple sources: self-report, parent report, teacher report, and behavioral tasks, measuring the ability to delay gratification. They also measured IQ. Self-discipline measured in the autumn accounted for more than twice as much variance as IQ in predicting final grades, school attendance, standardized achievement test scores, and selection into a competitive high school program the following spring. More than twice. Not slightly more. More than twice. Now, a later, larger replication complicated this picture somewhat, finding that IQ was the stronger predictor in a bigger sample. So as always, the science is nuanced. But here is the practical takeaway that has not been dislodged. IQ is largely fixed. Self-discipline is trainable. So even if discipline explains less variance than the original study suggested, it is still the lever you can actually pull. You cannot significantly increase your raw cognitive intelligence through effort. You can significantly improve your self-regulation through deliberate design, habit formation, and environmental architecture. And that asymmetry changes everything about where your attention is most usefully directed. Identity, the deepest layer, which brings us to the piece of the discipline puzzle that most people never reach because they're too busy trying to force their way through the surface layers. Habits, environment, systems. These are all real and all important. But underneath all of them is something deeper. Identity. The research on behavior change consistently shows that the most durable form of self-regulation doesn't come from external goals or even cleverly designed environments. It comes from a shift in how you see yourself. When a habit is anchored in identity, the question is no longer, do I feel like doing this? It becomes, is this consistent with who I am? Identity becomes the gravitational force pulling behavior in the right direction, self-sustaining in a way that external goals never are. The person who says, I'm trying to exercise more, is fighting their identity every single day. The person who says, I'm someone who moves their body, is simply acting consistently with who they already believe themselves to be. This is not semantics. It is a neurological distinction. Behavior that aligns with identity is almost effortless. Behavior that contradicts identity requires constant willpower to maintain. And identity, the research shows, is built not through declarations but through evidence. Small actions, repeated consistently, that accumulate into proof. Identity change isn't instantaneous. It is built vote by vote through the repetition of small actions. But once established, it is self-sustaining in a way that willpower never is. The compounding nobody talks about. There is one final idea in the discipline research that deserves more attention than it typically receives. Discipline compounds. Not in the obvious way, where doing disciplined things produces disciplined results. In a deeper, neurological way. The act of following through on a commitment, any commitment, however small, changes your relationship to future commitments. It is not just the action that matters. It is the evidence that action provides about who you are and what you are capable of. Every time you do the thing you said you'd do, you are not just completing a task. You are casting a vote for a particular identity. You are generating proof, biological, psychological, cumulative proof, that you are someone who follows through. And that proof, built up over time through hundreds of small, unglamorous, unremarkable acts of consistency, becomes the most powerful force in your psychological life. Not because of what you accomplished, because of who you became in the process of accomplishing it. The practical summary. So here's what the research actually says about discipline, stripped of the mythology. Stop relying on willpower alone. It depletes. It exhausts. It fails everyone eventually, not because of weakness, but because of biology. Design your environment instead. Make the right behavior the easy behavior. Put the obstacle between yourself and what you're trying to avoid, and remove every possible obstacle between yourself and what you're trying to do. Stop trying to be more disciplined through effort. Start designing your life so discipline is required less often. You don't need to try to be more disciplined. You need to put yourself in environments that allow you to stay that way. And, perhaps most importantly, stop framing this as a question of character, of whether you have what it takes, of whether you are fundamentally the kind of person who can do this. Because the research on identity, on neuroplasticity, on behavior change at every level says the same thing in 100 different ways. You're not trying to reveal a discipline that either exists in you or doesn't. You are building one small, consistent, unremarkable act at a time. And the compounding, as anyone who has ever stuck with something long enough to feel it kicking will tell you, is absolutely extraordinary. Like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.